Kia ora, welcome to episode 59 of the SWNZ Podcast, the podcast for New Zealand Star Wars fans. My name is Matt.
And my name is Christy.
It was another interesting week for news from a galaxy far, far away, so let's jump in and talk Star Wars. We'll open with a quick news roundup, and we want to talk about a few bits and pieces related to Season 3 of The Mandalorian. First up, there were rumours floating around in the last couple of weeks that Season 3 was going to be put on hold because of the coronavirus situation in the US. And if that was in fact the case, that would mean it would be very likely that The Mandalorian Season 3 would be bumped from 2022 to 2023. Rest assured, those rumours have been squashed quite solidly. Mandalorian Season 3 is currently filming as we speak, and with a bit of luck that does mean that it may show up, or it has the capacity to show up at the end of 2022 if scheduling amongst all the other Star Wars material coming out this year allows it. For a little bit of context, part of the reason that this rumour cropped up, I think, is because the Star Trek Picard production had to go on hiatus after 50 people from their crew tested positive for COVID-19. They're currently filming seasons 2 and 3 of that series back to back. That was reported on January the 6th. It happened just after the crew came back from the Christmas break. And with the large number of people being tested positive, they obviously had to shut things down. And that's put in quite a crimp in the scheduling for seasons 2 and 3 of Star Trek Picard. Shortly after that, this rumour that Mandalorian Season 3 was being put on hiatus for similar reasons came about, but as I say, that is not in fact the case, and we're hoping that they are able to keep filming and that all other Star Wars productions are able to keep filming so that we can stick to the schedule we've talked about many times, because 2022 is going to be a bountiful year for Star Wars if that is in fact the case. Also related to that, and on that note, and giving us further information that confirms that Mandalorian Season 3 is ongoing, is that Carl Weathers, the actor that plays Greef Karga in The Mandalorian, confirms that he will be in Season 3. I think this is great news. I love Greef Karga as a character and Carl Weathers as an actor. On Instagram, Carl says, "Thank you for all the wonderful happy birthday messages." It was his birthday in January. "You're truly appreciated. We're in the thick of shooting a new season of The Mandalorian. It's going to be fantastic. This is the way."
So yeah, it's really good to see confirmation that filming isn't delayed. I always take all these sort of rumours and speculation with a grain of salt until we hear concretely one way or the other. And it's good to know that, yeah, they're filming. I'm looking forward to seeing more of Greef Karga in the next season. And just, yeah, good news all around there.
Well, obviously, we're talking a lot about the Book of Boba Fett at the moment, but I am looking forward to the other material coming out this year and The Mandalorian Season 3 down the line. I'm particularly interested in The Mandalorian in some ways because we don't really know where the story's going to go. It's interesting that Carl Weathers is going to be involved at some level, and Katie Sackhoff is going to be as well, I believe, based on conversations she's had on social media. So we have a few hints as to what characters may be involved, but we don't know when it's going to pick up after the concluding events of Season 2 or where they're going to take it from this point forward. But I'm kind of looking forward to, I'm kind of enjoying that uncertainty in some ways and looking forward to the opening of that season down the line.
Yeah, well, I think that's part of the fun aspect of The Mandalorian. It was completely new, completely open, free to do what the writers wanted to do when we started. And obviously we had a little bit of a long storyline with Grogu, but that is seemingly wrapped up, and now we're back up to that sort of open possibility. There's a few threads, a few ways that could go. I'm not really sure which one they'll sort of really focus on, where these threads from that final episode might lead, but I'm really looking forward to it. I'm sure they've got all sorts of fun things in store.
I guess kind of related to that, Temuera Morrison's been interviewed a lot recently, and he's been talking about the possibility of showing up in other series. The conversation came around to the similarity of his face to some of the other clones. And he, in fact, himself said, yeah, Commander Cody, Captain Rex, I kind of look like those guys. Whatever happened to them? He says, if he turned up, if either of those characters or other clones turned up in Ahsoka, theoretically even Obi-Wan, or further down the line when Mandalorian returns, Temuera Morrison could end up being the actor with the most appearances in Star Wars live-action series, because a lot of other characters have capacity for overlap and threading into some of those other series, but none as much as Tim if he ends up playing an array of different clones.
He'd certainly go down as one of the people that would have the most Star Wars characters to their name. Some voice actors obviously end up doing a lot of different voices if they're really skilled with creating different accents. Obviously, D. Bradley Baker has got a lot there because he's able to really exercise his talents within the voice acting world. But not too many people ever get to play more than one face character in Star Wars. You know, you've got some people that have done masked aliens and things like that, good mime artists, puppeteers that have done a few sort of creatures across the board, but very few people. Once you've been sort of cast as a Star Wars character with your face, that's generally your one shot in Star Wars. You don't often get too many other chances there. So it would be really fun if he managed to pull off not just Jango, some of the clones in episode 3, but like beyond in this new era and sort of really add to his Star Wars roster of characters.
I'd be interested to see how he actually plays a different character because they, the ones that are featured in the material we see, even the animated material, they went to lengths to distinguish them, even though they're clones, to give them distinct personalities. And it'd be interesting to see to what extent Tim would do that in live action if this came to pass. Of course, we're just spitballing and speculating here based on a few comments that have gone around. And, obviously there's rumours and speculation online and leaks, but we're just talking here hypothetically at this point. So question for the audience, what clone character would you most like to see come back and have Temuera Morrison play in a live action series?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm not really sure. I mean, obviously, some of the ones that are getting thrown around would be like Cody and Rex, obviously being prominent clones. We've seen him portray Cody in episode 3, so I guess that one gets thrown up because he's already sort of played the character, but Rex is such a beloved character.
Rex is invented for the animated series,
I know that a lot of the sort of live action style merchandise leans a little heavily into Tim's, particularly when you look at some of the 12-inch figures and stuff like that.
Stuff from Sideshow,
they very much look like him, so I think that would tie in really well. But yeah, I'd love to see him in more Star Wars. I know that Lucasfilm is very loyal to characters. Disney, as a wider company, is very loyal to actors that work with them. You see the similar actors getting cast across the Disney sort of house of different projects. Like we saw Kelly Marie Tran in Star Wars, then she was voicing the main character in Raya. We see Ming-Na Wen going from Disney to S.H.I.E.L.D. within the Marvel universe and now in Star Wars. So once they've got somebody hooked in, it would be a shame to let an opportunity like that go because they know how much the fans love the clones. And they're very easy merchandising because you just stamp and repeat. You just take the same clone trooper mold and then you make lots of them with different colors and stuff like that. So it's very easy for them to make clone trooper merchandise.
Yes.
And you've already got a pretty good sculpt of Tim's likeness across all gamuts, 12-inch action figures, even the Funkos.
Yeah, so we'll be watching this space in terms of confirmation down the line. But, Tim has mentioned a couple of those names himself. The words came out of his own mouth. So whether or not that was sort of an intentional slurp or a misdirection or a clue or a hint, it remains to be seen. But I kind of look forward to the possibility.
I know a lot of people that are trying to keep secrets about their projects kind of have to do a little bit of a tongue-in-cheek, wink it off, sort of throw things around, try and throw fans off because they know that if they get caught spilling real spoilers that they'll get a little bit of a telling off. So I know that they sort of have to dance around it. Not all of these sort of thrown out threads ever eventuate, but I know that the fan enthusiasm for it is there. Speaking of Temuera Morrison, for fans of the Star Wars Galaxy of Heroes app game, if you're a sort of top tier player, reports are coming out that players that's playing at the highest levels of the Conquest mode within the game will have unlocked recently the Boba Fett Scion of Jango character. Now this is Boba Fett as he appeared in the Mandalorian series. So he's a very cool character and he's got his helmet off, so it fully looks like Tim in the game, which is very, very fun. So for mid-tier players like myself, he is still a little bit way off. I'm still grinding, trying to earn him as a character, but it's very fun seeing the top players and some of the YouTube content creators showing off this character that is able to be unlocked now. And in terms of other characters for the game, Iden Versio from Star Wars Battlefront 2 has been added to the game. Now, she is a great addition to the Imperial Trooper lineup. I am very, very keen to play around with her and really build up my Imperial squad. She is a very fun character, and I'm really glad to see some of the more other Star Wars video game characters from recent years being added into this game. So if you're a Star Wars Galaxy of Heroes fan, or you're interested to check it out, the game is free to download from both app stores, so definitely check those new characters out.
Okay, let's talk a little bit about product announcements and local store reports, because things are starting to warm up again in terms of new products showing up on retailers around the country. First up, some Funko Pop vinyl figures. A wave of Valentine's Day themed pink colour scheme pop vinyl figures is going to be coming out from all the usual retailers, including Mighty Ape. They're priced at $25 generally. You can get them for $23 if you're a Primate member at Mighty Ape. This wave includes the Mandalorian, Grogu, a Mandalorian holding Grogu figure, Ahsoka, and a Luke holding Grogu figure. Quite a cool wave. This approach to celebrating Valentine's Day started last year with Funko, and a number of those figures are still actually available for purchase. They were all original trilogy figures last year. The R2-D2 was an exclusive one. He's a little harder to find, but all the others are actually still available at Mighty Ape. I think this Mandalorian wave is going to be a little more sought after, particularly the likes of Ahsoka, with Ahsoka merch being very hot right now. So this pink version is quite cool. So if you want to jump on those, do so through the link we're going to put down below. Unfortunately, because of the way they're going to be brought into the country and the times at which they're going to release, they're probably only going to ship in New Zealand just after Valentine's Day, but they're still cool collectibles anyway. Okay, talking about Black Series 6-inch figures that are showing up around New Zealand. Really interesting to see. We didn't get any advance notification of this, but the deluxe pack that features the Mandalorian and Grogu set on Arvala 7, the planet, which features the Mudhorn and the Jawas and the pursuit of the egg, is available as a pack at the warehouse, priced at $59. Deluxe pricing there, but a little cheaper than some when it comes to this product type. So it's a very cool figure of the Mandalorian caked in mud. It comes with Grogu in his hover pram using the Force as he stops the Mudhorn, and it comes in fact with a appropriately scaled egg for recreating the scenes on Arvala 7.
I really hope, whether it's down the line or years down the line, I really hope that we get a matching Mudhorn to go with these scenes. I mean, it kind of resembles the Reek from the sort of Saga era episode 2 range of figures and things like that. I would love to see, scale, because it's become his sort of signet, his sort of little emblem of his clan of 2. I think it would be a fun collectible in both 4-inch and 6-inch scales. I really do hope we see that.
I hope we do. I'm not holding my breath, to be honest, from Hasbro, but I'll tell you what though, there's a lot of fan-created product coming out in both 3.75 and 6-inch scale that includes some really cool things like appropriately scaled blurgs and background scenes and background components for dioramas. I saw a very cool version of the weapons forge from the recent episode of the Book of Boba Fett, the Tusken weapons forge, that are quite, they're expensive because they're custom made garage pieces, but there's fans that do some really cool stuff, and a few of those can be hunted down and sought out online. So even if you don't get an official one, it's possible you may see one from other sources.
It's kind of interesting because with the rise of action figure photography, there are books on Star Wars action figure photography now, and with Hasbro putting out more diorama sets, they are obviously aware that people like to create scenes either for display, for play for children, or for photography to really show off your collection. So it seems weird that they have yet to put out some of the creatures that would fill out these scenes, some of the small vehicles and things like that. I really do hope that that is part of their sort of long-term plan to sort of really fill out collections, because it is easier and generally more affordable for collectors if it's mass-produced by Hasbro than going the fan-made route. But at least the fans are creating some really cool stuff out there if you're an action figure collector that really likes to flesh out your scenes.
So the Mandalorian and Grogu Arvala 7 Planet Deluxe set shown up at the warehouse unexpectedly. That was reported by a couple of different people in the SWNZ Facebook group, so shout out, thanks to those that shared that information in the SWNZ group. Also in the SWNZ Facebook group, we have heard that farmers have the Tython Boba Fett and Book of Boba Fett Fennec Shand Black Series 6-inch figures available just recently. So keep your eye out on farmers, because we might be getting a wave of new Black Series figures that's shown up around the country. So again, good source for that sort of information is the SWNZ Facebook group, because when people find them at their local branch, they give us a shout out in that group, and it lets other fans take a look around their respective branches to see what's available, and it's a great way just to sort of share and crowdsource that hunting, so you don't have to go to every branch yourself, as we did in the distant past when we were looking for figures.
Especially in this modern era where it seems like there can be quite a difference between different retailers. There are certain figures that show up at the warehouse that don't show up at farmers and vice versa. So it really helps the community when people pipe up and say, I found this at this place. Yeah. So you don't need to go and just hunt every place that stocks figures trying to hunt it down. You know where your local branches, go check them, ask a staff member if it's not on the shelf, and a lot of the times you'll hit success.
Some department stores get specific ways and some don't, and then there's a whole array of figures like the Avala 7 Deluxe pack I was just talking about that aren't part of a standard wave per se, and it's just showing up by itself at a retailer. Don't forget, stores are not always as efficient as each other at getting them on the shelves. When you hear about these things being available at the farmers or the warehouse, it often means that they have been shipped, but may not mean they're actually been physically put on the shelves. We personally have encountered situations where we've just gone to customer service and asked if they're at the back yet, and lo and behold, they have been, and we've been able to get them fresh out of the case before they hit the shelves. So if you're into mint-in box figures, that's important, I'm sure you're mostly all aware of that, but that's an important thing to remember, and it does work for both farmers and the warehouse in particular. More Lego Star Wars sets are showing up around the country. There is a wave that includes the Razor Crest Microfighter set 75321, the Hoth ATST set 75322, and the Snowtrooper Battle Pack set 75320 that are showing up at a number of different retailers. The warehouse has really good pricing on the Razor Crest and the ATST. The Razor Crest is coming in at $16, so a little bit under some of its the competitors around the way, and the Hoth ATST is coming in at $81. They're up to $90 elsewhere in other retailers. The warehouse doesn't seem to have the Snowtrooper Battle Pack online just at this point. Farmers definitely does. It's priced at about $34 at the likes of Farmers. And of course, these sort of products are going to show up at Toyco and the Lego store and a couple of other online retailers. New Zealand Mint is continuing to print Star Wars money, literally. Just released yesterday from memory is a Grogu in Hoverpod, Hoverpram, 1 ounce silver coin priced at $150. This doesn't seem to be associated directly with one of their specific character lines, but it is quite a cool figure, quite a cool coin, quite a cool representation of Grogu in the pod, which actually features Baby Yoda quite prominently, so the pram is there to just sort of frame him and give him a bit of context. We've seen versions of jewelry and such like where the pram sort of dominates and it looks just a little bit more like a sphere, but this is a nice version of Grogu in the hover pram available at New Zealand Mint if you're into collecting those things, and also from New Zealand Mint if you're collecting the Faces of the Empire set. The 6th out of 16 coins has just been released. This is a Death Trooper. Again, 1 ounce silver coins tend to be priced at about $148. The price does fluctuate a little bit because they base their pricing on US dollars and then convert to New Zealand dollars, even though it's coming out of a New Zealand site. So Faces of the Empire Death Trooper out now. Grogu in Hoverpod, both silver coins out now. Alright, let's talk about the latest Book of Boba Fett episode 3, The Streets of Mos Espa. Written by Jon Favreau and directed by Robert Rodriguez. This episode starts with Boba Fett talking to a watermonger who comes to petition him. Lothar Peel, played by Stephen Root, wants a gang of cyborgs who are stealing his water in Mos Espa to be punished. Peel claims that the citizens of Tatooine do not respect Fett yet, and Boba Fett seems a little surprised at this. Hasn't heard of it himself directly. He goes to sea to confront the gang, and seeing that he hears from them directly that they're not working, that they're actually being ripped off, so to speak, from the watermonger. So he actually sympathizes with them. He employs them as enforcers and speaks directly to Lothar Peel, tells him to reduce the price of his water because he believes he is price gouging. Shortly after that brief encounter, Boba Fett is back in his Bacta tank, recalling scenes of his time with the Tuskens. He is departing the Tusken tribe to go and get toll from the Pikes, as discussed in the train heist episode. He goes into Mos Eisley to do that, but when he returns to the Tusken camp, he finds that the Nikto swoop-by gang have obliterated the entire encampment and killed most, if not all, of the Tuskens that were there. We see confirmation that the chieftain of the tribe has been killed, and an implication that the younger adolescent Tusken has been killed. You don't see every Tusken that's been featured killed yet, so there's a little bit of hope that some of them may have escaped, but we don't know where that's going to pan out. Anyway, this is obviously a very significant moment for Boba Fett and his story. During that flashback scene, in fact, we're abruptly switched between that flashback scene and real time when Boba is awakened from his bacta tank by Chrysanthemum the Wookiee yanking him out quite aggressively, and a fight ensues. Boba Fett's clearly out-muscled, Chrysanthemum being quite a large, muscular Wookiee compared to some of the other Wookiees we've seen, so Fett's self-defense attempts are pretty futile, but Fennec Shan, the Gamorrean guards, and the cyborg gang actually come to his rescue, and the Wookiee Chrysanthemum is captured. Turns out that the twins, the Hutts, sent Black Chrysanthemum to kill Boba Fett. When that fails, they realize it's in their best interest to apologize, and they claim that the land on Tatooine, that the domain of the daimyo on Tatooine has in fact been promised to another syndicate. The twins say they're going to leave Tatooine, and as they are apparently going to depart, they give Boba Fett a rancor to appease him. Boba Fett releases Black Chrysanthemum and resolves to train the rancor, and the fun bit, we'll talk about this shortly. The Rancor also comes with a Rancor Keeper or Rancor Trainer, played by Danny Trejo. Boba Fett goes in to Mos Espa with Fennec to confront and question the mayor. They find that he is not there. The Major Domo, the Twi'lek, tries to escape and is chased down by Boba Fett and the gang of cyborgs that he's hired as enforcers. We sort of wrap up the episode by learning that Mok Shaiz is working with the Pikes, and the Pikes are arriving on Mos Espa en masse, and Boba Fett is consequently required to sort of prepare for the confrontation, to prepare for war with the Pikes. So there's a lot that's really, really fun and exciting about this episode, and we really want to focus on the things that we enjoyed. I do want to talk about the fact that there's been a few people complaining about how Sophie Thatcher's character Drash and her cyborg gang don't really seem to fit into Star Wars, but you know, there's some really solid defenses against that argument, and I just want to briefly talk about that, reflect on that before we go on and talk about some of the other things we found to be really, really fun about this episode. The main complaint leveled at Drash and the gang seems to be that they don't fit in with the aesthetics of Tatooine. I think, you know, we can have quite a bit of a conversation about George Lucas's passion for hot rods and the 60s era and the aesthetics of the 60s era as shown in American Graffiti and as implied in terms of pod races or some of the prequel era designs of speeders and so forth and diners on Coruscant. But the thing to really remember here is that this gang of cyborgs with their Vespa-like candy apple coloured speeder bikes is based on the British youth subculture of the mods that existed in the early to mid 60s and early 70s. And the thing about the mods is they were a counterculture that focused on fashion, music, drugs, transport. And they did this because they existed in a post-war era. They were reaching their 20s, starting to acquire money and income to a certain degree through fair means or foul in the era that took place just after the Second World War, and their goal was to distinguish themselves from their parents and their siblings who were still leading a bit of a frugal, rationed life as a consequence of the war, and who were used to that sort of lifestyle. So it was a counterpoint to that war and post-war era that focused in particular on fashion and transport and visible differences that broke away from that sort of mundane, grey, rationed era. And of course Tatooine, as well as the rest of the galaxy, exists in a post-galactic Empire versus Rebellion war era at this point in time. So it does kind of all fit together and make sense. And bright colours, sure, they stand out against the Mos Espa streets, but I don't think they're unheard of. There's plenty of precedents for bright colours in the Star Wars universe, including even on Mos Espa, because of course we see droids painting Anakin's pod racer, and pod racers come in all sorts of bright colours, and it's pretty easy in the technology of the Star Wars universe to slap coats of paints on pretty quickly with designs or bright colours or whatever in the blink of an eye.
I think people forget some of, we look at Star Wars with the lens of it's all Star Wars because it is Star Wars to us now. Most new things have to sink in, they sort of, whether they feel completely authentic or not, they are part of Star Wars. And I really appreciate all the either in-world or real-world references that the modern Star Wars era infuses in this. There's obviously been a lot of thought put into this gang in terms of the historical references, and any kind of outcast gang deliberately make themselves stand out visually. If you think about goths or punks or any kind of really strong subculture, that their look and their fashion and the way that they put themselves out there. I mean, you look at the sort of the boy racers and things like that, where they put all their money and their funds and their attention into their cars, making them bright colors, getting custom paint jobs and stuff like that. And having a custom paint job on a car, like I look at, like C-3PO, he's chromed gold. Now that's a pretty big sort of like flex. And we kind of forget that most of the protocol droids we see in Star Wars are some shiny, shiny metal. It's kind of quite bright, and yet we're kind of used to it, so it doesn't seem weird. Like if we thought that, that Boston Robotics was going to make shiny gold robots, then we'd probably think that looks weird. But of course, C-3PO exists in the Star Wars universe. I wonder whether, there's going to be more to this gang than what we've seen so far. And I really want to see where that goes. I wonder whether we will see some off-world planet, because I think that they would look like they would fit in really well with like a Coruscant or Nar Shaddaa, some of these planet cities with really bright lights and neons. I mean, we think about Coruscant, there is neon lights everywhere. We don't really think of it as not being Star Wars, despite the fact that we see not neon bright signs in Tatooine, but we see them all over Coruscant and stuff like that. And in the galaxy of galactic space travel, of course you're going to have people wanting things from other cultures, other planets and stuff like that. Luke wants to be somewhere else other than Tatooine. He wants to go see the bright cities of the galaxy.
In terms of fashion, they're going to be influenced by wealthy planets. And we know that, we've already seen Garsa Fwip's Sanctuary Cantina. We know that it's far from impossible to find or import or find via other people that have imported, fashionable items and fashionable fabrics and construction materials. So I don't think that's a strong argument against their appearance either.
We've seen the opulence of Canto Bight. We see the sort of very different degrees that the Star Wars galaxy can have. It's like when people sort of argue that, this accent or this alien doesn't sort of fit in. And it's like, well, no, the Star Wars galaxy is incredibly vast. You almost can't say that anything doesn't sort of fit into it because we simply haven't seen all of the cultures and aesthetics that exist within this universe. And there's nothing to say that these are slave kids that have grown up on Tatooine or people that have been displaced by the war and have simply hunkered down on Tatooine because, as we see by all the stormtrooper helmets on the spikes, the Empire has abandoned Tatooine. So if you're trying to get away from the Empire and trying to get away from the war, Tatooine does seem to be, a little bit of a backwater planet to hide on. So if they've been displaced by some war, they're going to bring their culture and their aesthetic with them.
Yeah, so we don't want to dwell on apologetics, but I think there's a couple of key points that actually make sense here in terms of references to other cultural influences that are worth just pointing out and that you may well be familiar with or may well have noticed or thought about yourself. My personal perspective on Star Wars is not so much about owning it or saying how it should pan out or what story elements should be incorporated. I'd like to just let it flow and take it on board as it comes to me. And there's plenty of variety for that to be happening over the next year or so, and we're all going to see all sorts of interesting bits and pieces, because never forget that if you've got a perspective on Star Wars and it all went your way, then it wouldn't be going somebody else's way. There's lots of people that are trying to keep happy at the same time. So, let's talk about what we did see. The episode opened with a B'omar monk outside Jabba's palace. I believe Phil Tippett was involved in this, Phil Tippett Studios. I saw him actually mention it, so that does actually mean there's a chance that was actually a stop-motion character, which would be quite fun to have Phil Tippett. Phil Tippett Studios were credited, I think, for VFX as well as some creature contributions, and he specifically referenced that B'omar monk droid, so that would be quite fun if that was the way that actually panned out. Stephen Root was an interesting surprise in the Star Wars universe, but I think he played the Watermonger character quite well. I think some of the people that are conversing with Boba Fett are doing so with quite a fun sort of... Clearly they're trying to go through a routine for their own benefit often, particularly the Major Domo from the Mayor's office, but it's kind of fun to see the facade that they put on, and but also to sort of speculate what the underlying layers were, and clearly Lothar Peel, Stephen Root's character, had some ulterior motives, and he was just trying to get favour out of Fett.
Yeah, it's fun to sort of see the sort of day-to-dayness of sort of the Star Wars underworld, where you've sort of, you're all trying to be just a little bit pushy with your own sort of agenda, but you've still got to sort of do a bit of glad-handing and sort of, rubbing people the right way, putting coins in people's pockets and things like that. So I thought that was sort of really fun seeing how sort of the day-to-day negotiations and things of Boba Fett's sort of title and position within Tatooine. It's not just oh, yep, he's this person, now we're going to go see him shoot up a bunch of bad guys. I like seeing those sorts of bits and pieces. I also thought it was fun that the droid, it starts out with him, the holomap, and describing...
Matt Berry's 88 droid, yeah.
Yeah, describing what happened after Jabba and Bib Fortuna, and saying that Bib Fortuna didn't really have the sway to keep everybody in line. So he basically divided Mos Espa between three main gangs, Trandoshans, Aqualish, and Klatooinian. Now, in the trailer, we see Boba meeting with Trandoshans, but we do have to wonder whether we'll see more of those alien species sort of coming together.
Or whether or not we're going to be focusing on the Pikes and Cali Syndicate.
It seemed really sort of noteworthy that they specifically chose three very well-known Star Wars alien species that we have seen.
Original trilogy creatures,
that I thought were really cool. So after Stephen Root's character comes, the watermonger. I thought that was like a fun fleshing out of the Tatooine sort of lore again, working with
interactions and the fact that people are doing desperate things or doing dubious things and then misrepresenting who. It means it's kind of hard to see who the good guys are, who's actually taking advantage. Sure, he was having water stolen, but he was having water stolen because he was price gouging, during hard times, an essential item, a necessity for life on a planet where it's hard to come by.
So Boba Fett goes out to go find the gang that the watermonger's complaining about. He finds them. We sort of get a vibe of the gang. They all have modifications, as he described, that they all have sort of cybernetic components, some for sort of looks, some for, actual functional upgrades.
They all seem to have their own unique weapons and fighting styles related to those weapons, which becomes more evident later.
Yeah. They complain that there isn't work. I get a really fun vibe from the main character.
So that's Drash. Sophie Thatcher's character.
Yeah, like she gives him sort of respect, but she's not afraid to sort of speak up and speak back to him.
Which makes sense for someone that's coming from an anti-authoritarian counterculture, where they are not also anti-authoritarian. They also are a bit skeptical of people from other generations.
But I think that that's just the right sort of vibe for Boba Fett to invite them to work for him instead, because he
saw their potential.
Yeah. That they respect him, but they still have enough sort of grit to be able to survive on Tatooine and sort of aren't getting shoved around.
He believed their story. He saw that they were, even though they stole the water, they were telling the truth. They had no reason to hide it, whereas Lothar Peel, the watermonger, was misrepresenting things which didn't sit well with Fett.
We see that in stark contrast to the Nikto gang, where we see them shoving Cammy and Fixer around at Anchorhead for no reason other than just being mean, and just being thugs. Yeah. So I think that that's kind of like an interesting play. He can respect gangs when they align with his sort of values and his worldview, and he sees that they sort of align with his worldview. So we get another little shot of what could be stop motion or just a CG, a cool little frog dog outside Jabba's palace. Obviously, we saw that original creature way back in Return of the Jedi. So that was a fun little nod, whether it's the same one or whatever, still sitting out there catching other small creatures as they go by. I like those little touches outside.
Then we get back to tank scene. Pretty much just switch focus again there. And when we talked about this in our Twitch live stream last week, straight after the episode, I described this episode as quite a roller coaster, because this is where we really see the fate of the Tuskens, and it was a real gut punch. And it reminded me that Tim in an interview at least a week ago, probably a couple of weeks ago, that he mentioned that there would be some scenes that might bring a tear to the eyes within the audience, and I think this is probably what he was referring to. So it was pretty horrific and emotive to see the entire Tusken Raider encampment, who were just, getting to know them as a people and as a culture, and to see them all brutally murdered like that was definitely a gut punch.
It was a really interesting story arc when we think about the very first episode, where they basically dragged him through the deserts behind their banthas and beat him with sticks and, sort of set upon him in various ways. And then going to the end where we're literally mourning these Tuskens that we've never seen their face, and they're still the same Tusken Raiders that we sort of know them to be, but we've got a very inside. So it was really sad and not entirely surprising, because I felt like there was definitely going to be some sort of character arc for Boba to go through, that he's become one with this clan, and then to have them ripped from them. And then, as we see on one of the tattered tents, we see the graffiti of the
Condensed Riders.
The Condensed Riders. Yeah. He calls them the Nikto Sand Riders, because the Nikto is the species and stuff like that. So he knows very clearly who is responsible for this, and they have sent a message.
Yeah.
We don't know whether they have done this in retaliation for his attack at the bar and stealing of the speeders, or whether in the sort of alliance with the Pikes that they have done this to basically take out the competition, that the Nikto gang wants the sort of payments for protection from the Pikes. So either way, maybe it's both, but a message has been sent, and obviously that's going to be something that Boba is going to see to down the line. Yeah. So he is now untethered to the Tusken clan.
Yeah. So the other bit, because I was jumping around just a little bit in terms of recounting things, the reason he was away from the camp was because he was going into Mos Eisley to speak to the Pikes there. And I thought this was a little bit interesting. There was a lot going on in Mos Eisley. The first thing that struck me is that the buildings felt like Mos Eisley right from the get-go, and it felt different from Mos Espa. And they've been making a point of distinguishing between the level of wealth or poverty between those two regions, and the level of opportunity in Mos Eisley is definitely down there.
Yes, when he was threatening the watermonger in the street, he said, you can either take my terms or perhaps you can go to Mos Eisley. And the look on the watermonger's face makes it very clear to the audience that is seen as like
a downgrade.
A downgrade on a long stretch. So that's kind of like a real backwater grungy place that you want to be trading in Mos Espa.
It's smaller, and if there isn't a population to sell your stuff to, then you can't make money, you can't jack your prices up, or even with regular regional prices can't make money. So yeah.
Which kind of really goes to show how kind of, humble Owen and Beru's sort of upbringing and obviously Luke's upbringing in that sort of area is.
Compared to other parts of Tatooine.
That there are, certainly as Mos Espa is now formally established as being the closest city and sort of Jabba's one, that having a sort of Hutt crime lord as the kind of the ruler, he would expect a certain amount of prosperity. You can't get money from the gangs and the people paying sort of protection money and paying tribute to you if they are our poor as well. So obviously you need wealthy residents in a city to pay the crime boss good money. So we get a sense of where everything kind of is really fitting in, and obviously that does position Boba Fett in a really good position if he is now sort of, daimyo for a more of a wealthy city compared to other settlements on Tatooine.
So I thought it was interesting to go back to Mos Eisley, and there's some real cool trivia points in that. Peli Motto was seen with her pit droids in the background. They didn't draw attention to it, but there wasn't much else going on in that scene, so it was quite intentional in that she stood out. So that was a fun callback to the Mandalorian episode where Din Djarin visits Tatooine. And we also see the Stormtrooper helmets, I think you mentioned this earlier in the podcast, being put on the spikes, which presumably are the same ones we saw in the Mandalorian episode, which implies that this was taking place prior to Din Djarin's visit to the Mandalorian, just in terms of working out where all those timelines fit. So at this point at that point in that flashback scene when Mando is visiting Mos Eisley, that's prior to Fennec Shand being hunted and being shot and left for dead in the desert.
Yeah, I thought that those were good ways to kind of remind the audience of where this is taking place, because we have not yet seen in flashback or real time or whatever when Boba Fett truly meets Fennec Shand and obviously rescues her because she was mortally wounded in that episode of The Mandalorian. So I'm kind of hoping that we're not completely done with the flashbacks, that we do see that element.
Yeah. So it was a pretty abrupt transition between those flashbacks and back to current times as far as the timelines of the episode. When Boba is wrenched from his back to tank, back to goes everywhere, he's still in his medical underwear, and he's fighting for his life against Chrysanthemum. And he was obviously getting his butt kicked in this episode, to be blunt, but I actually quite liked it. There's a few things that really stood out to me. The stunt performers that would have been involved, Tamara Morrison, to the extent that he was involved, did a really good job, even though he was losing and was in a lot of jeopardy, of conveying that Boba Fett as a character doesn't stop, doesn't give up, because in every instance he was getting pummeled, he was getting thrown around the room, but he was just looking for everything he could to fight back, and he got a good few stabs in with his gaffy stick, and left the gaffy stick impaled on Black Chrysanthemum's shoulder at one point. So that was what my take home from that message before the Cyber Gang and Fennec Shand came in to ultimately rescue him and the Gamorrean guards. He, no matter what, wasn't putting up. He was, pounding on his head when he was in a chokehold and so forth.
Certainly within sort of Mandalorian culture, they prize their armor and they have a lot of weapons. We see the Mandalorian with, his disintegration rifle and his little whistling birds and stuff like that. They have a fair amount of tech.
Yeah,
so it's interesting to see that, he hasn't got his armor on, he hasn't got his tech with him, but he does have a bit of more sort of brute force combat that he would have learnt from the Tuscans. Clearly they still use staff weapons, but he's a little bit more used to rolling around.
As a bounty hunter in his previous life, because he is, let's be honest, he isn't a bounty hunter at this point. That's not the story that's being told. In his previous life, he would have relied almost exclusively seen in his suit with all his gear. So he would have relied heavily on that and its multiplicative, capabilities whenever he has this sort of encounter. But he had none of that. He was stripped of it, so he was relying on his more recently acquired fighting skills. And that's definitely part of the story, I think.
Yeah, it certainly fit to sort of be the formidable foe that Wookiees are always described as be. If they can rip men's arms off, then they have to be able to, basically win in a unarmed, one-on-one combat, which we essentially see. We know that Chrysanthemum does have weapons. We see him with sort of a electro knuckle duster at one point, which is a fairly formidable weapon there. And of course, just when you think that Boba Fett might be done for, this is when his newly acquired gang, the Gamorreans, come in to interrupt the fight, to break it up.
So we move through a couple of story elements quite rapidly at this point. We move through the Chrysanthemum being trapped in the Rancor pit. Boba Fett actually instructs the gang to help the Gamorrean, at least one of the Gamorreans, to bag the tank, which was kind of an interesting little just side note, I think.
I like that the Gamorreans weren't just sort of like a throwaway, like, oh yeah, people associate them with Jabba's palace, so we'll just throw some Gamorreans in there. I think that they're sort of proven to be very loyal. We see them standing up to the Wookiee to the point where the Wookiee understands that they're formidable, and he basically
prioritizes them to the threat,
runs at them, tackles them down the stairs, to which point Fennec knows where the trapdoor is to drop down to the Rancor pit, and she is able to get the trapdoor open. The Wookiee falls, catches onto the end, and that's when we see that shot where she pulls her little sort of throwing knife out of the end of her rifle, flings it in his hand, and of course, obviously that's going to cause pain. He lets go. It drops down into the Rancor pit, which we know is empty, and they've obviously got him trapped in there, so the fight is sort of over at that point.
So yeah, like I say, we moved at this point in the actual episode. We did actually move through things fairly fast, and the next significant thing was that the Hutt twins, who sent Chrysanthemum, know that he's failed, come to apologise to Fett. They know that's in their best interest, and they also convey that they are about to bail from the planet, go back to Hutta, partly because they don't think there's much value in staying, but also because there's information out that
the mayor has basically promised Tatooine, or at least Mos Espa, to another syndicate. They use the word syndicate. Yeah. So they're just like, war's not good for business. This isn't worth it. So we're going off. We apologize for Black Chrysanthemum. They basically give the Wookiee as a gift to Boba because they don't really care. They're like, you can sell him, do whatever you want with him. At the end of the scene, we see Boba Fett actually let him go.
Yeah, just business, he said.
Yeah, and we see the Wookiee kind of give him a look and then runs off. So I don't know if we've seen the last of him there, whether he may respect, because we know certainly the concept of Wookiees respecting those that spare their lives, the concept of life debt and Chewbacca and Han's relationship and stuff like that. But he might just like help. We might see him help, not to the point of being a loyal life companion or anything like that. But of course, the big thing with this is that huts also bring a specific gift, which we see on sort of a hover sled, which is a Rancor with...
Subdued at this point, complete with Rancor Keeper.
With Rancor Keeper, yes.
Just subtly sneaks into the background there. Looks a little familiar from a distance, and then they zoom in on it, and clearly Danny Trejo, one of the most recognisable actors in Hollywood, of course.
But he totally fits in the role and that scene. He looks like the sort of a rugged person that would work with big, fearsome beasts. So I think it was a brilliant casting note there.
He's done a lot of what Danny Trejo's done a lot of work with Robert Rodriguez before, and Robert Rodriguez, as we've said in previous conversations, uses people over and over again, people that he knows, people that he's friends with. Interesting trivia, the actor that plays Kasantan, the Wookiee, actually played a Predator in the 2010 Predators film that was co-written by Robert Rodriguez, and Danny Trejo was also in that film. So Kasantan and Danny Trejo have crossed paths in other films before, along with Robert Rodriguez, of course. So it's quite an interesting bit of crossover. But yeah, I think it was just last week, I think we were talking about the emptiness of the Rancor pit, and I half-jokingly said, I wonder if they'll try and fill it again.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think everyone loved the fact that this Rancor turned up. It is a juvenile Rancor. And once we're finished with that encounter with the huts, we switch to the Rancor pit and Danny Trejo talking, again, quite emotively, and about the, what did he say?
We learn more about the Rancor. It's lying on the ground, and Boba's like, why is it just lying there? And the Rancor Keeper says that they're emotionally complex creatures, that it's depressed. We see that it has blinkers on, and he explains that it's done so because Rancors imprint on the first sort of human, the first owner that they see. So it's been sort of blinkered since birth, or at least very, very young.
Someone was bred to fight, but rescued by Danny Trejo's character. I don't think he's got a name yet. Rescued that he was going to train him himself, but clearly it's a gift to Boba Fett, so he's going to help Boba Fett train it.
Yeah.
Boba Fett takes a immediate liking to the Rancor and the potential for this, and declares that he wants to actually train it and learn how to ride it.
Yeah, there's a fun reference. The Rancor Keeper references the Witches of Dathomir that used to ride it, which I thought was an interesting bit of sort of lore reference.
The timing was very interesting as well, because sadly Dave Wolverton, the author, passed away in the past week. Dave Wolverton, and he wrote a number of different Star Wars titles, were probably most well known for The Courtship of Princess Leia that came out in the mid-90s. It was that book specifically that the Witches of Dathomir and the riding of Rancors was first introduced into Star Wars lore.
Yeah, it was a really sort of sad coincidence, I guess, that he was the author that first brought Dathomir and the witches to the Star Wars galaxy, and then this reference in this episode. So it was a bit sad, but it was exciting,
fun to see
the reference,
see the use of older material in that way. Yeah,
and certainly Boba's expression saying that he wants to write it. So I'm like, okay, they've put that out there. You can't say something like that and not deliver it to it. So they know that they're amping the fans up. And then we see the Rancor has its blinkers taken off, and you see its sort of blurry vision focusing on Boba Fett. So we see the Rancor has seen Boba Fett as the first one, and he goes up and pats its face. It's a really cute sort of moment, and we see him instructing the Rancor Keeper to feed it a whole Ronto carcass. Ronto is obviously a reference to the creatures that we have seen in the special edition of A New Hope with the Jawas riding it. It was an action figure, but it's also a reference to Galaxy's Edge, where there is a food stall called Ronto Roasters where you can buy the Ronto wraps. So it's kind of a reference to it being an animal that you can eat for its meat. So I thought that was kind of fun. But that sort of cute interaction is interrupted by the droid saying that the mayor can't see him for like 20 days. And this obviously angers Boba Fett. So off we go to the next sort of section where Boba and Fennec, flanked by the new gang, go to see the mayor. Mayor's not there. The majordomo is obviously trying to stall. He goes into the room and locks the door behind them, and they sort of bust in and found that he's escaped out the back door, and this leads to basically a car chase down the streets of Mos Espa.
Now, again, slightly criticised, but I'm going to let it slide on the whole. It was never intended to be a high-paced speeder bike through the forest of Endor scene, I don't think. The mayor's majordomo is trying to escape in a fairly rudimentary, land speeder as far as we know. It's nothing to suggest that it's souped up or overpowerful in any way. Cyber gang do chase him down. It's got to be a little bit hard riding speeder bikes through right-angle corners and tightly packed buildings around Mos Espa. So there's lots of crashes that go on.
I think it's almost supposed to be just a little bit clumsy because the mayor is obviously not really like, a proficient speeder racer or anything like that. No,
he's not a physical character. His whole role has been, he's a wordsmith, he's a smooth talker, and that's his strength and his character.
I almost think that there was supposed to be more of a humorous element to the fact that he was a little bit incompetent with his speeder piloting. We see some really funny moments, droids sort of trying to dodge. We see the standard sort of fruit carts getting knocked and stuff like that.
Well, the major domo, the Twi'lek, he's using hand gestures to get out of the way, the whole time. And then, of course, there's the speeder bike crash through the painting. Not a pane of glass, but a painting that's been carried across the street. Almost, you could just blink and miss it, but you could kind of tell that there was a hut, presumably Jabba, in there. When you freeze frame it, there's a really fantastic Easter egg. It was almost a direct copy for Ralph McQuarrie concept art for Luke Skywalker's encounter with Jabba in Jabba's palace.
Yeah, there's only two minimal changes where they've taken out Luke, and a protocol droid has been changed from C-3PO, which is obviously a recognizable character, to a generic protocol droid. But other than that, it's nearly identical. So it's kind of like another fun referencing, like you said, the sort of Tusken Forge is clearly referencing Macquarie art. This is, again, they've literally put it in the shot where we can see it.
Art,
which I thought was really quite fun. So I think if you were focusing purely on speed, you wouldn't be able to have moments like that. And I thought it was supposed to be sort of a slightly clumsy, slightly humorous way to sort of do it. And obviously, the speeder bike gang are trying to, do things without causing like a huge ruckus. We don't see them with big weapons. They're not just going to sort of shoot out the speeder or anything like that. They've just got their cybernetics. So we kind of see this as a bit of just kind of showing off a little bit of the kind of modifications that they have, what that might imply later down the line. We see what some of them have got.
Yeah, I think that is a bit of foreshadowing, showing that they have hidden weaponry, hidden capabilities, and so forth, and that may come into play down the line. So the Twi'lek Major Domo crashes ultimately into a cart or a stall of Malurons, referencing all the way back to Star Wars Rebels where they first cropped up.
I also like the moment where he knocks past a droid carrying two Bith in sort of a cart, which I thought, the droid, I'll have to look at screenshots to see, but it feels very strongly referencing the droid that sort of carries Anakin and Padme when they're trying to find Watto in episode 2.
That was almost I think it was pretty much the same style.
Yes, and the Bith looked like sort of like a male and female couple. I thought that was fun referencing. Again, playing a little bit more on the humorous rather than just sort of straight hard action. So that's why the speed of it doesn't bother me. I think if you put in like big weapons or anything like that, it might play a little bit differently. They just shoot his speeder out.
It wouldn't have made, if it was a Han Solo sort of speed chase, it would have been out of character for the Mayor's Major Domo. I don't think it would have read quite as well. So anyway, the Major Domo reveals when he realizes that the fight's over, the game's up, he's lost. He reveals that Mok Shaiz is in fact working with the Pikes, and that's a bit of a revelation. Yeah,
and then we see the shot from the trailer of a big starship. It's referred to as a Starliner later on, coming in with lots and lots of people coming out, including a great many Pikes.
No, I just as a side note, I really like the design of these starships. I like them in the trailer, and I like this notion of interplanetary travel at a sort of a public level. And there's design elements that look Corellian, that look like they're borrowing from even the Millennium Falcon in terms of the landing ramps and so forth. But clearly they're big public transports. You can book passage. So yeah, again, just another side note, I really enjoyed their design and the sort of concept of interplanetary transport at that level. Clearly we see lots of interplanetary transport, but just this down to Tatooine sort of use of starships in this way.
It almost seems like it's trying to be a little bit sneaky, because if the Pikes were going to sort of invade or bring big forces, we assume that a powerful crime syndicate would have their own starships, but they're coming in on sort of the big public transport ships. So it's kind of like a little bit, and then one of the gang sees this, uses a sort of a public communications terminal to report to Boba saying that there are a lot of Pikes coming in, and Fennec notes that they're gearing up for war. So Boba says, we'll have to be ready. We're going to be ready.
And that's the note that they finish on, kind of implying that, things are really escalating quickly, to coin a phrase. And that's where we're going to be heading into episode 4 and the closing episodes of this season.
Yeah. I mean, I look at this episode, I look at all the episodes of Star Wars that come out, but there's always going to be like some really cool notes. There's going to be things that maybe don't vibe with you fully. I mean, you know, most people can look at Star Wars, any sort of things, you know, there was a bit of controversy even around an episode of The Mandalorian where Grogu was eating Frog Lady's eggs and stuff like that, you know, and some people found that they really didn't like the episode with spiders because they have a fear of spiders and things like that. So there's always going to be things in episodes and Star Wars that just
almost been a little bit spoiled, to be honest. Because if we think back to some of the episodic TV shows of the past, even like, you know, Star Trek, Stargates, you know, whatever we previously watched, the pacing between episodes and those sort of material was just all over the show. There's clearly duds in most series and most seasons, you know, along the way. We don't, you know, completely walk away from a season or a series because of a single dud episode or a single episode with different pacing that stands out. And I don't think this was a dud episode by any means. I thought it was a roller coaster ride with some really cool Easter eggs and some really cool surprises and some great visuals and some great references and callbacks.
I'm super excited about the Rancor. I hope we see more of it. We primarily saw it lying down. Yeah. I really can't wait for the moment where we see it standing up and doing things. And I really appreciated the fact that it appears from behind the scenes photos that at least the full head was real. It felt like its eyes were blinking.
At least as a stand-in. Those eyes were probably CG. They were when it first opened its eyes, there was a lot going on there. They were very organic and very believable.
But it feels very, very real. Yeah. I especially like the moments where Boba Fett was riding his bantha through the town. Yeah. It felt like it was almost puppeted because it was kind of a high-level shot, so you didn't see the feet of the bantha. But it felt like it was really there. It didn't look CG. And I'm like, I'm starting to doubt my eyes. Is this really, really good CG? Because it's got hair. And hair in CG generally has a little bit of touch of CG-ness to this. But it looked really real.
From what I've read, we talked about the possibility of some of the, or at least one of the banthas, and it's usually just one hero creature when in this sort of scenario, being a physical prop and the rest for the wider shots being CG. And since that time, I did actually read that there was, in fact, one physical bantha that was puppeted by 4 people, and it's entirely plausible that 4 people with a puppet could transport with, you know, a human rider. Temuera Morrison as a rider, so it would not surprise me if that was actually a practical effect, which would be really quite cool.
It's one of these, it's moments like that where I really wish that there was just a big museum where people from the audience could go and look at some of the Lucasfilm archive stuff. Because the things that they're building for these shows and for the movies, it would be really fun to just go and see. Because it's been a great many years since anybody down under has been able to go to see a traveling exhibition since...
At least we know we're almost guaranteed to get some behind-the-scenes materials for this, because they're going to follow the pattern of Season 1 and Season 2 of The Mandalorian and give us behind-the-scenes material for this.
Easy content for Disney+.
Another behind-the-scenes shot I saw just in the past week was the Tusken camp was set on a backlot in Los Angeles studios. Just everything around it was blue screen, so all the sand dunes were blue screen, but all those tents were physical, the whole lot. Quite a large set. Outdoors under natural lighting with just sand dunes CG'd in there, so you could move between all those tents but be in a completely, you know, protected and controlled space. It wasn't done on location, it was all constructed. So yeah, I'm looking forward to that behind the scenes material down the line when this is all wrapped up.
Yeah, so all up, I really enjoyed this episode. I'm the sort of positive Star Wars fan that I like to take everything in before I make any snap judgments. I know that the Star Wars shows have a way of sort of building up to things and we may not fully understand. I know that we're kind of trained as Star Wars fans to watch a movie and then we're like, okay, that was the story. And you can kind of dissect and go, okay, this flowed, I liked this bit and stuff like that. But you can't do that. You can't take that same approach to TV shows. We don't know where they're building up. We don't know what the importance or sort of casual side comments are. So I like sitting back and watching the whole show before really deciding which were my favorite parts and things like that. I love the creatures. I'm always a little bit sad when I see things like banthas get killed. So I'm hoping good endings for the Rancor. I think it would be cute. I don't want to see its demise in this show.
I don't even
Fingers
see
crossed. No, I think so. Yeah, I enjoyed this episode and I'm super, super looking forward to the next one.
Alrighty, that's about it for this installment. I guess we're done doing talking. If you have thoughts on the topics we discussed today, we're keen to hear them. Leave a comment on the YouTube page or our website page for this podcast. Thank you for tuning in, though. We appreciate you taking your time to listen to us share our passion for Star Wars. Stay tuned to our website, SWNZ, for Star Wars news for New Zealanders and another podcast episode next week and every Tuesday. We will be returning to our Tuesday schedule next week. And don't forget, you can jump on over to either our Facebook group or the SWNZ message boards to discuss all the latest Star Wars news with other Kiwi fans. Kia ora, kia noho haumaru. Thank you for listening and stay safe.
Turou Hawaiki. May the Force be with you.
If you enjoyed today's podcast, go ahead and like the video, check out the SWNZ Podcast playlist for our other episodes, and subscribe for alerts about new episodes. See you next time.